I'm Branko Milanovic, and I work at the Luxembourg Income Study and at the Graduate Center, City University of New York. And I was previously working in the research department of the World Bank. Well, actually, on global inequality, of course, we don't have, excellent data that we wish we would have, but we can still trace the changes in global inequality in the last 200 years. So global inequality before the Industrial Revolution was relatively low because basically you had all countries at the same level of income. Each individual country was unequal, obviously, but when you add all of this up, the inequalities were relatively small. Now, what happened with the Industrial Revolution, and I very often actually sort of say that's very similar to Big Bang. So you had some countries, in this case Northern Europe, and then followed by the obviously United States and Canada and Australia and finally Japan, becoming very rich. And other countries, and particularly big countries, populous countries like India and China remaining very poor, or even actually in some cases like China going down. So that created a huge gap in average country incomes and added tremendously to global inequality. So global inequality probably reached a peak in around maybe 1970s, 1980s. But since then it has started a small decline, but it's actually the first time since 200 years. We are experiencing probably a little bit less of global inequality compared, as I said, to that peak. And this is happening because now, in a reverse movement, you had China, India, Indonesia, and all the other Asian countries growing very fast, so they are catching up with the rest of the world. And what is actually interesting to realize that although inequality in each individual of those countries and in each rich country, basically UK, US, and so on, has gone up, because of such an important catch-up in average incomes, so that actually people in China who were very poor are now becoming part of middle class, you have a decline in global inequality. So once again, actually, it's an important point. You can technically have increase in inequality in each individual country, and yet global inequality can go down. But one should be careful. We say, yes, global inequality is down, but it's really down by a very small percentage. And it's probably down because also we cannot capture very well in household surveys the incomes of the very rich. But it should not really make us actually, complacent or believe, well, things are really improving tremendously and we can do nothing now. So definitely it's a little bit better, but one should not exaggerate that. When you talk about national inequalities, we do have answers because this is not something new. We have had, policies which were reducing national inequalities for 150 years. I mean, there are obvious ones are really taxation, making sure that the distribution of assets becomes more equal and more widely spread education and actually more equally distributed gains, or in other words, wages from that education. Because even if you have, 14 years of education and one person goes to Harvard, another person goes to some small college, their gaps are going to be large if there is a difference in quality of places where you go. But for global inequality, the situation is much more difficult because there is no global government. There is nobody. We are talking about the tax on financial transfers. Maybe it would be introduced, but there are no really global taxes. So there you don't have a tax element. Secondly, global inequality depends tremendously, as we have just seen, on growth rates of different countries. So paradoxically, the best way to address global inequality is by making faster growth in poor countries. So what is essential is that the poor countries grow faster. The second element, and maybe it would not be very popular to say today, but the second element is migration. Because migration is de facto the same way of increasing incomes as growing fast in your own country when you are poor. Because when we talk about global inequality, we talk about people. So formally speaking, it is equivalent whether I become rich in my country or I become rich by coming to Switzerland. Now, the difference, of course, and I'm not naive, is political. But from the economic point of view, the two things are exactly the same.